Let's agree on an understanding as far as the calorie deficit itself. Is this an appropriate calorie deficit to begin with?
Great
So
point.
when I say an appropriate calorie deficit, I don't mean a crash diet. I don't mean slashing your calories in half. I'm talking about a caloric deficit of 300 to 500 calories below your maintenance or below your total daily energy expenditure. So start there first, that your calorie deficit is, you're not overzealous with your calorie deficit, because hunger will certainly come with that. It's going to be unsustainable, and there could be a lot of negative downstream effects from overdoing it as far as a calorie deficit. So let's get that understanding squared away first, and then we can address, yes, some of the hunger that could take place. And it's funny that we brought this topic to the table today because I was just having this conversation with somebody like 2 days ago.
Weird.
As far as an individual who has gotten into a deficit, and he's like, man, I'm dealing with some constant hunger right now. I'm dealing with regular hunger. And the first thing that I told him was, that's actually a good sign. It's actually a good sign that you are feeling some hunger, because that tells me as your coach that you're actually in a deficit, or more than likely actually in a deficit. I would say a less advantageous response would be, yeah, I'm in this calorie deficit, whatever, 1,700 calories, and I don't notice any change in my hunger. That tells me either you're eating more than you think you actually are, your tracking isn't accurate, or we may be dealing with some metabolic downregulation. So for this individual, I was like, you know what? It's a good thing, actually, that you are experiencing some hunger. And then I went into a few of the tips that we can go over today as far as how to address that.
Yeah, so this is a very appropriate response. There's things happening, right? Your body is obviously recognizing that, I'm not getting as much fuel as you usually give me. And so that starts sending signals, right? Those are very natural signals that your body will send you. It's part of our deep-rooted, survival mechanisms. Like, you're hungry, dude, you need to eat. What's going on there? Obviously, there's some physical things you can feel, empty stomach, a little growly, maybe a little upset stomach. Might feel a little, might be some emotional things that go on there. Might feel a little antsy.
I get very hangry.
Hangry, yeah.
Very, very hangry.
What's going on there? There's, obviously a drop in blood sugar triggers other things. So if your blood sugar's starting to get low, hormones switch on to say, hey, dude, you need to eat a little bit. Or there's things that happen to try to figure out a way to balance that blood sugar, right? There's things happening in the brain chemically. There's things happening in the stomach chemically, or in let's call it the GI tract, or the second brain, that are happening chemically. So this is not weird. It's not unknown. And you are not feeling anything more or less than somebody else would feel or is feeling. So you're not special.
Natural response.
Yeah, it's a very natural response. And I think it's important that you understand that the folks understand that this is a chemical process as well as a physical process. The physiological always precedes the physical. So if you are feeling something, that's because something physiologically is happening there. And to your point, Stephen, this is very appropriate. That's what you're asking it to do. In going into this deficit, is to basically switch these things on. So you have to have your head wrapped around that first. Like, you're going to feel this. Okay, so what are some of the things to get around it?
Yeah, you'll have to deal with it to a degree, but obviously we want this calorie deficit to be successful. We want it to be sustainable. We don't want somebody to be miserable, feeling restricted, because then we can switch over to like a binge restrict type of cycle where you essentially snap or crack and like, you know what, I'm starving, I'm just going to go after it. And then we can sabotage the results that we're trying to get, if you're doing that regularly enough, at least.
Yeah, sorry, let me just jump in here on that restriction piece, because that's what you're doing. You're going to be restricting something. You're going to probably be restricting timing, right? And I'm sure Stephen's going to get into this, but you're going to be restricting timing or managing timing differently. You could look at it kind of two ways. There's obviously a restriction of calories, so you're not taking in as much. And you might be also restricting your energy expenditure, and how you're doing that. Maybe you're cutting your workouts back, or maybe you might even be expending more. But that restriction is something you're going to have to get around. And something that's important to note here: all those chemical processes, once they start in, the switching them off doesn't happen right away. So going back to like the binge piece, so if I overeat, right, my body's super hungry, it takes a while for that. I'm eating and I'm trying to get full. It takes a while for that chemical process to switch on, to then get to the brain, to then get back and go, hey, dude, you're full. Well, you were actually full minutes ago, right? A while ago, and you're just eating beyond, the timing or the sequencing of how quickly that signaling can work. And that's important to note too. I'm trying to feel full, but now I'm over full, whether I know it, I may be over known or not. And that's where that overeating, binging piece can really wreak havoc.
Yeah, it can become sort of like an impulsive or compulsive eating,
100%.
almost unconscious eating. So we'll talk about that as far as eating slowly, eating mindfully, how we allow enough time for those signals to get from the brain back to the stomach to let you know that you actually have had enough. But the dead horse that will always have to be beaten again and again. If you're trying to mitigate hunger on a caloric deficit, you need to be eating enough protein.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, with the protein. Especially on a caloric deficit, I typically recommend that 25 to 30% of total calories coming from protein. You'd likely want to be closer to that 30% side of the spectrum on a calorie deficit. And there's a few reasons for that. Protein just tends to be more filling, tends to be more satiating, and that can actually be an obstacle to folks who are increasing their protein consumption. So you can use that to your advantage as far as sort of filling yourself up on protein, again, to an appropriate extent. But you're also going to get, a little bit more kickback as far as like thermic effect of food and the caloric expenditure, consuming a higher percentage of protein. So you're getting a little extra calorie burn digesting protein versus digesting carbs or fats. So that would be the place that I would certainly start. And that's the first thing that I recommend is increasing that protein consumption.